Most people spend their lives caught in a subtle, exhausting game, the game of appearances. It starts early. At school, you learn that being liked matters, that saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, and fitting in will make life easier. And slowly, without even noticing, your focus shifts. You begin to care less about what is true and more about what looks good in the eyes of others. This is the first trap, the belief that image is more important than reality. Society rewards appearances, the smiling face, the polite words, the carefully curated version of yourself. You can be hollow inside, but if you shine on the outside, you'll often be celebrated. The problem is that this external approval doesn't come for free. It demands that you shapeshift into whatever form others expect of you. And here lies the quiet tragedy. In becoming what others want to see, you lose sight of who you actually are. You trade authenticity for acceptance, thinking you've made a smart deal. But deep down, something starts to decay. You no longer act from conviction, you act from calculation. We live in a time when appearances have more reach than ever. Social media has turned life into a public stage where your every move can be displayed, judged, and rated. These platforms don't just encourage the display of our best moments, they demand it. You don't post what's real, you post what performs. The result is a culture where being good often means being seen as good. But here's the dangerous part. When you care too much about appearing virtuous, you will eventually compromise your actual values. You'll avoid telling uncomfortable truths because it might make you look bad. You'll nod along with opinions you don't believe because it's safer. You'll support causes you don't understand simply because they're popular. You'll learn to present the mask of goodness, even when it has nothing to do with your real beliefs. The irony, people who are deeply authentic, people who refuse to bend their truth for the sake of optics, often end up misunderstood, criticized, or even disliked. In a world obsessed with images, the honest person can look like the villain. They're the ones who say the uncomfortable thing in the meeting, who refuse to fake enthusiasm for trends they don't respect, who won't play along with the polite lies that keep the peace. They don't look nice, but they are far more real than the smiling faces that hide daggers behind their backs. Imagine someone who refuses to flatter their boss just to get ahead. They're seen as arrogant. Or a person who speaks out against a popular but harmful idea. They're labeled as intolerant. In both cases, the world punishes them not for being wrong, but for breaking the illusion. And because the illusion is sacred, they become the villain in the story. This is the core confusion. We've mistaken the shadow for the substance. We judge people not by their principles, but by how comfortably they fit into the group's expectations. We value harmony over honesty, comfort over truth. And when that happens, the good person is the one who follows the script, not the one who dares to write their own. But there's a deeper danger here. When you live for appearances, your identity becomes fragile. Because the moment public opinion turns, you're left with nothing. You can spend years building a reputation, and it can vanish in an instant. And if that reputation was all you had, the collapse will feel like death. That's why the courage to be yourself is so rare and so powerful. It's not glamorous. It's not comfortable. It's a slow, often lonely path, but it's the only way to live without fear of the mask slipping. Because when you stop pretending, there's nothing left to expose. When you've been trained to value appearances over reality, truth doesn't feel neutral. It feels violent, not because truth itself is cruel, but because it shatters the comforting illusions you've built to survive. If you've spent years pretending, every honest statement becomes a threat. The truth exposes the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be, and that gap is painful to see. So instead of facing it, people attack the messenger. This is why people who are direct often have a bad reputation. Not because they're wrong, but because they remove the masks others have carefully stitched to their faces. Imagine living in a room where everyone agrees to dim the lights so no one has to see the cracks in the walls. Then one person walks in and turns them all on. Suddenly the imperfections are visible. The light didn't create them, it just made them impossible to ignore. This is exactly how authenticity works in a world built on politeness. The moment you stop flattering, stop hiding, stop smiling for approval, you expose the silent deals everyone else has made with dishonesty, and they'll resent you for it. Even worse, the world will often disguise this resentment as morality. You'll be told you're harsh, negative, or uncompassionate, not because your words lack truth, but because they lack the sugarcoating people expect. This is the paradox. A society that worships kindness often uses that kindness to protect lies. You can see this everywhere, in politics, in workplaces, in friendships. The person who tells a hard truth is painted as a disruptor, while the person who hides it behind smiles is celebrated for keeping the peace. But keeping the peace at the expense of honesty is not peace. It's quiet decay. When someone refuses to play along, they are accused of being dangerous. And in a way, they are, but not to justice or morality. They are dangerous to the comfort of self-deception. If you've ever told a friend an uncomfortable truth about their relationship, you know this. They'll be hurt, defensive, maybe even angry. Not because they didn't already suspect it deep down, but because you stripped away their ability to keep pretending. In that moment, you're no longer their friend. You're the person who made them look at the wound they were ignoring. And yet, here's the irony. The people who resist truth the hardest are often the ones who need it most. They're clinging to illusions like a drowning person clings to driftwood. And while you might see the driftwood as rotten and useless, to them it's the only thing keeping them afloat. This is why authentic people are often lonely. They're not alone because no one likes them. They're alone because they refuse to live in a way that requires constant pretending. And this scares people. It's easier to keep company with those who tell you what you want to hear. But authenticity is not cruelty. In fact, it's one of the purest forms of respect you can give someone, to treat them as strong enough to handle reality. The problem is, most people don't want that kind of respect. They'd rather be comforted than confronted. They'd rather stay asleep in the warm dream than wake up to a cold truth. And here's where the trap deepens. When you realize how much the truth costs socially, you might be tempted to stop speaking it. You might think, why should I bother? Let them live in their illusions. But if you do this too often, you start to betray yourself. Because every time you silence your truth for the sake of acceptance, you chip away at your own integrity. The world will never give you a round of applause for staying true to your convictions. But here's the quiet reward. You sleep at night knowing you didn't sell your soul for a smile. Most people think influence comes from joining the game and learning how to win it. But the most unsettling power you can hold is refusing to play at all. Because when you step outside the rules no longer apply to you, and that terrifies those who depend on them. Every social circle, workplace, or family has an unspoken currency. It might be approval, loyalty, flattery, or silence. These currencies are traded daily, and people measure each other's worth by how well they participate. But the moment you stop trading in that currency, you make the whole system unstable. If you are liking this content, please leave a like and a subscribe so we can continue. Thank you. Think about someone at work who refuses to gossip. At first, people just think they're quiet. But as time passes, their refusal starts to feel like judgment. Why? Because their silence forces everyone else to see the pettiness of what they're doing. Without saying a word, the non-participant becomes a mirror, and most people hate what they see reflected back. This is the strange part about authenticity. You don't need to attack the system to expose it. All you have to do is live outside of it. And when you do, the people inside will react as if you've declared war. They'll try to pull you back in, sometimes with charm, sometimes with guilt, and sometimes with outright hostility. They'll say things like, "You've changed," or "You think you're better than us," when all you've done is stop playing along. Because to them, stepping out isn't just a personal choice, it's a rejection of their way of surviving. Here's the truth: most people aren't loyal to you, they're loyal to the role you play in their world. And when you stop playing that role, you stop being valuable to them. If your role was to comfort them, they'll resent you for challenging them. If your role was to agree, they'll resent you for disagreeing. And if your role was to make them feel powerful, they'll resent you for walking away. This is why the path of authenticity feels so lonely at times. It's not that there aren't people who will value you. It's that the filtering process removes so many at once. The minute you stop being convenient, the crowd thins out. But here's the paradox. While you lose numbers, you gain depth. You might go from 100 shallow connections to 3 or 4 unshakable ones. People who value you not for the mask you wear, but for the person you are when no one is watching. And those relationships, while fewer, will sustain you in a way surface-level approval never could. Still, we have to be honest. Stepping outside the game comes with a cost. You lose access to certain opportunities, certain favors, certain open doors that are only open to those who play along. If you want to keep your integrity, you have to accept these losses. But the trade-off is this: you no longer live under the constant pressure to perform. You no longer measure your worth by applause or inclusion. And without realizing it, you begin to move through life with a kind of quiet authority. Because nothing and no one can threaten you with exile when you've already exiled yourself from their approval. That's the kind of strength people can feel without you saying a word. It's the reason someone walks into a room and, without being loud, still shifts the energy. They're not trying to be impressive. They simply have nothing to lose. And that's unsettling in a world where everyone else is terrified of losing something. When you reach that point, people will call you intimidating. They'll say you're hard to read, hard to manipulate, hard to control. And they're right. Because the moment you stop playing their game, you stop living by their scoreboard. When you step outside the social game, something unexpected happens. You don't just change the way people see you, you change the way you see them. It's as if the moment you stop playing by their rules, you suddenly notice the invisible strings pulling everyone's movements. You see the subtle performances, the strategic silences, the carefully crafted smiles. You start to recognize when someone is speaking from truth and when they're simply rehearsing a role they've played 1,000 times. At first, this new vision can feel like a superpower. You walk into a room and can almost read the air. You notice who's aligning with whom, who's undermining who's faking agreement to avoid conflict. You see the hierarchy without anyone having to announce it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But this clarity comes with a danger. If you're not careful, you can become cynical, believing everyone is fake, that all interactions are transactions. And while that's partly true, it's not the whole truth. Yes, most people adjust themselves for survival, but that doesn't mean they're incapable of authenticity. It just means they've been taught to hide it. The key is to notice the masks without resenting them. People wear masks because they believe the alternative is too risky. They've learned, often the hard way, that showing their true self can lead to rejection, shame, or loss. So they cover up, not because they're inherently deceitful, but because they're scared. This doesn't mean you should excuse manipulation or dishonesty. It means you can see it for what it is, not a personal attack, but a symptom of a deeper fear. And when you see fear clearly, it loses some of its power over you. Now here's the paradox. Once you operate outside the game, you actually gain more control within it. You're not easily baited into emotional traps. You're not swayed by flattery or intimidation. And because you're not desperate to prove yourself, you can walk away from situations that would keep others trapped for years. People will sense this in you. Some will find it threatening. Not because you've done anything to them, but because you remind them of the freedom they don't have. Others will be drawn to it, curious about how you seem so unshaken while they're constantly on edge. This is where your responsibility comes in. The way you carry yourself from here on matters. You can use this clarity to quietly navigate life with dignity, or you can weaponize it to manipulate and dominate. One path will isolate you completely. The other will connect you with the few who can truly meet you as an equal. And here's the truth. People will still misunderstand you. They'll still project their insecurities onto you. You might be accused of being arrogant, cold, or thinking you're better than everyone else. That's because when you're not playing the validation game, you're living by a different metric, and to those stuck inside the game, that feels like rejection. But you can't live for their approval without stepping right back into the trap you worked so hard to escape. The goal isn't to convince everyone you're good. The goal is to live in a way that you can look in the mirror and know you didn't betray yourself. Over time, you'll notice something interesting. The few people who stick around after you've stopped performing will be the ones who speak to you differently. Their conversations won't be about appearances, status, or gossip. They'll want to know what you think, not what you've heard. They'll share their vulnerabilities without fearing you'll use them against them. That's when you'll realize the real prize of stepping outside the game. It's not dominance, not freedom from criticism, not even peace. It's connection without pretense. And once you've tasted that, no amount of applause from the crowd will ever feel the same. Once you've seen the truth, once you've noticed the game, the masks, the invisible chains, there's no way back. The question becomes, what now? Most people think freedom means doing whatever you want. But real freedom is the ability to act without secretly begging for approval. It's the ability to make choices without checking the room to see who's nodding along. The first thing you'll notice is how quiet life becomes when you stop performing. The noise of constant comparison fades. You no longer obsess over who's doing better than you, or whether your life looks impressive from the outside. That silence can feel unsettling at first, almost like something's missing. But that's just withdrawal, the absence of the constant dopamine hit from validation. Then comes the test. People who once praised you might now pull away. Friends who were comfortable with the old you might not recognize the person you're becoming. They might accuse you of changing, as if staying exactly the same was the only acceptable option. And in a way, they're right. You are changing. The difference is, this time you're not asking for permission. This stage is dangerous because loneliness can trick you into running back to the game. You might think, maybe if I soften my edges, they'll come back. Maybe if I explain myself better, they'll understand. But that's the trap. Every time you explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you hand them power over your identity. The only antidote is to live in alignment long enough to attract the people who resonate with it. That's when something rare happens. You start to meet others who aren't playing the game either. The connection is different. There's no scoreboard, no silent competition, no transactional subtext. You can disagree without it turning into a war. You can be silent together without it feeling awkward. You're not trying to sell an image to each other. You're simply there. It's in these moments that you'll realize the real point of seeing through the game isn't to win it, it's to leave it behind entirely. You don't need to prove you're good because you've stopped playing by their definition of good. You don't need to defend yourself against their projections because you know who you are without their approval. But this freedom comes with a responsibility, to hold on to your clarity without turning it into arrogance. Because the moment you start looking down on people for still being in the game, you've created a new game of your own. The goal isn't superiority, it's authenticity. One day, you'll walk into a room and realize you don't care whether anyone notices you. Not because you think you're invisible, but because you no longer measure your worth by the spotlight. And that's when you'll know you've truly made it, not to the top, but out. In the end, the people who matter will see you. Not the mask, not the role, not the performance. You. And that's the kind of recognition no audience, no status, and no applause can ever replace. So live without their permission. Speak without rehearsing. Walk without looking back to see who's following. The moment you stop asking for their validation is the moment you finally start living on your own terms.